Hi, my name is Alistair Johnston, and I'm a Senior Analyst and Head of Collaboration at FutureSource Consulting. In this course today, you are going to learn how the world of work has changed since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, and how things will continue to change over the next few years. So if we look back to the beginning of the pandemic, what were the challenges we all faced? The first and most obvious is there were a whole suite of new tools and systems that we needed to learn, new ways of working, new platforms to work on. And so things like Zoom and Teams, suddenly millions of people were on those platforms. And that influx of millions of people, all at once, posed problems. For instance, it was sometimes difficult, in terms of bandwidth, to have a meeting on a Monday morning because everybody else was having meetings on Monday mornings too. So you had to find a different spot, at least until the platforms and the ISPs increased the flexibility and the bandwidth. There were also issues on the supply side. It was difficult to find cameras or headsets or microphones because everyone wanted them all at the same time. And then there was the cultural issues that it just felt weird. Lots of people didn't like being on video. It made them feel self-conscious and awkward, and they didn't know how much of their house was visible, and issues with children and pets. So if we look at some numbers, 71% of people were using video more after the pandemic than before. And that's not very surprising, but it's worth noting that 29% of people had already been using video. This is not a new technology. It just wasn't spread out across everybody. 75% of people who use a headset are using a consumer headset, like a gaming headset, not a work one. And 51% of those people who prefer using audio are doing so because they feel self-conscious with video. We researched how people's attitudes to work, where they do it, and how they do it, have changed from before the pandemic to during the pandemic to their expectations for a post-pandemic world. The proportion of those people who would prefer to never work from home has fallen from 17% before the pandemic to just 9% now. The proportion of those who would like to work from home 3 or 4 days a week, that's gone up from 18% to 27%. But perhaps most interestingly, the number of people, or the proportion of people, who'd like to work from home every day has fallen from 18% to 16%. This whole experience of the last year or two has shown us, first, that home working works. It can be done. It may not be ideal, but it can be done. But it's also shown us the value of being around each other and going to the office. The future of work is a combination of working from home and being in offices. And this is what we call the hybrid work model. So, what then are these benefits of home working? Well, there's work-life balance. Not having to commute an hour in one direction to go to work and then an hour back is a gift of 2 hours every day that people can spend in a different way. Added to that, of course, is a social responsibility. Less commuting means less pollution. Some people prefer the flexibility. They like to be able to work very early in the morning or perhaps in the evening. The 9 to 5 is largely something that we've inherited rather than each chosen. But if those benefits are so obvious, and if the new way of working in a hybrid model of office and homework, if that's so clear and the benefits are so obvious, then why has it taken a global pandemic for us to get there? But it's important to realise that these trends were already out there in the market before 2020. If we look at video conferencing equipment, that grew by 77% between 2018 and 2020, while wireless conferencing devices grew by over 4,000% in the same period, albeit from a very low level. However, these technologies weren't spread evenly throughout the population. There was a small group of people who used them a lot, while everyone else didn't really use them at all. And that's because these tools and these platforms often require a new way of working, and they might require some training and some thinking about how best to integrate them in people's workflows. We call some of this the first click problem. It's difficult to get people to take that first step onto these platforms. And the first time you use a video camera or a video bar, it can be confusing. But once you go past that first connection, you realize it's not so complicated and actually quite useful. And people tend to enjoy themselves once they get past that barrier. We were only able to keep working in 2020 because the technology was cheap enough and mature enough to keep us connected. On the hardware side, video conferencing used to be a very expensive proposition, suitable only for the higher-end boardrooms. But over the last 5 years, those prices have come down, and that's meant that these solutions can go into smaller and smaller spaces, from medium-sized rooms to small rooms to huddle spaces to home offices to desktops. At the same time, there's been a rise in cloud platforms like Teams, and Zoom and Google, which allow their users to collaborate and communicate from anywhere with an internet connection, and at either very low or no cost. And that internet connection point is also crucial. More than 80% of us in the US and the UK now have broadband access. The figures are a little lower in some Asian countries, but their mobile internet is growing in power and coverage. And with the rollout of 5G, we can expect even greater access to video in those areas too. When we think about work, we also need to think about the people who are doing that work. Workforces have always changed. There have always been new people coming into the workforce while others retire. But what we're seeing now is the rise of a group that we call the digital natives. Broadly speaking, the millennials, who range from late 20s to 40, and the generation after them, Gen Z. These generations have grown up around technology. They've grown up around collaboration and smartphones. And they already comprise more than half of the global workforce. And this figure is set to rise to 72% by 2030. And with this change in the workforce comes a change of attitudes. Digital is not something to be afraid of. They're very used to digital and technology, and they're very used to communicating and collaborating using devices with their friends and families. So doing the same in the workforce, in the workplace, is not a big deal. The rise of home working has led to a rise in the home office. But what does that change? Well, the biggest disrupting effect is if the end user is allowed to choose the hardware. If an end user is allowed to choose something, or particularly if they're paying for that object, they're much more likely to choose something which they can take into other contexts outside of the work. A good example is headsets. With 75% of headsets bought by end users are consumer or gaming headsets. Headsets which they don't just use for work, but also perhaps to listen to music or for gaming. So does this mean that the home office is in competition with the meeting room and the corporate office? Will it take investment away from that? Well, we don't think so. This hybrid model means that you need both. You still need the corporate meeting room, and you also need the home office. Both are business critical investments, and so vendors and manufacturers in those spaces need to target both. So much for home working. What's happening in the office? Well, we're also seeing quite profound changes there. 72% of people now regularly hold meetings outside of either their desk or an official meeting room. Now, some of the most popular places for that would be a breakout space or a cafeteria, or perhaps in a pod or a booth where now 42% of people regularly take meetings. And this is a relatively new phenomenon, but an interesting one. We're in an individual meeting room where you're meeting virtually on some kind of cloud conferencing platform or taking a call, but you want privacy from your co-workers. There's also been small but significant rises in hot desking. We may have expected hot desking to reduce during the pandemic as people feel less comfortable with the idea of sharing space or using a surface which has previously been used by someone else. But actually, we found that hot desking and social distancing are complementary. When companies have to repurpose their floor space and maybe spread them out more and put in blocks between desks, hot desking actually works very well with cleaning and wiping the desk before and after the end of the day. So what's the new normal meeting room like? Well, let's compare it to the old version. Previously, meeting rooms were central hubs. They were places where people went to talk to each other. Sometimes one meeting room would speak to another meeting room through a video or audio conference, but the meeting rooms themselves were the central hubs of business communication. In the new normal, that's changed. Meeting rooms are now just one of a longer and more diverse chain of potential endpoints. Meeting participants may be in a meeting room, but they may also be in a cafe or in a different room within the same building, or calling in from home or on the road. And all of those endpoints are equally valid and equally important in this new hybrid work model. This means that technology within the meeting room must be very flexible. It has to meet the needs of both the in-room participants and those who are outside of the room. And the people in the meeting, they may not know which of those situations they're going to be in. They may accept an invite a month in advance and not be certain whether they will actually be there in person or maybe doing the meeting from home. Either way, the technology needs to support either decision. And this is the key point, that this investment is now business critical. Companies simply cannot afford not to invest in meeting room technology, as this is the only way that we can work, communicate and collaborate in this new normal hybrid work pattern world. We're going to be living with the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic for some time. And so what do organisations and employers need to do? Well, the first consideration is social distancing. This means that the layout of desks within an office will have to be different. We can't put everyone in one small space. This clearly has implications on how many people can come into the office and how many people you can have in any one area. There's also the impact on meeting rooms. They need to be bigger for the same number of participants to ensure that people can keep a distance from each other. Then, of course, there's track and trace considerations. How do you balance keeping your employees' privacy rights with also alerting them if they need to know about any potential outbreaks? Touchscreen technology is also an issue. There was a trend before the pandemic for more and more meeting controls to go into either a touchscreen on the wall or a touchscreen on the table, something which you could use to control all the meeting functions. But how comfortable are people going to be using a touchscreen now? It seems much more likely that they'll bring in their own device like a laptop and plug that in and feel more comfortable using their own hardware. And finally, flexible working is here to stay. Many people will not be coming back to the office at all, or at least not full time, and this is a reality that employers are going to have to work around. So if we think about the future of work, a key question is, what is the office for? Now that question hasn't come up before because it was fairly clear. An office is where you do your work, but is the office the best place for all kinds of work? One of the benefits many people found from home working is that they could actually concentrate. They could get done certain pieces of work which were just very difficult to do in a busier environment where they would get distracted more. But then again, there are certain types of work which are better done in person. It's hard to collaborate and brainstorm over a Teams call. It's possible, but it's not ideal. So in the new hybrid work model, work is divided according to location, depending on which location fits the type of work. Certain tasks, in some ways what we think of as the work, the long pieces of concentrated effort, are perhaps best done at home. But there are other kinds of work, the collaborative work, planning, connecting with colleagues, are best done within an office. And if we follow that line of thought, then we would expect an office to become more of a collaboration area than a working area. That instead of having desks where people can go and do their work quietly, perhaps with headphones on, all of that can be done at home. But instead, when you go to the office, you go there to talk to colleagues and plan and scheme and come up with ideas, which means more meeting rooms and more collaborative areas. So, to summarise, the world of work has changed forever. While some aspects of human life, going for a meal, going to the theatre, are returning to approximately where they were before 2020, work hasn't gone back to how it was, and we don't expect it to. So what's the difference? Well, largely it's because of this enormous cultural change which has occurred around the use of video and other digital collaboration and communication devices and software. Millions of us have started using Microsoft Teams, Zoom, and so on for the first time. And although we don't really like using them all day long every day, they are useful. So the new world of work and the new technologies will have to be characterized by a great flexibility around location and device type. These technologies will have to work from more or less anywhere, at least anywhere with an internet connection, and they'll have to work on a broad variety of different devices: mobiles, tablets, desktop, laptops, meeting rooms, etc. Now, there's a lot of conversations which are going to have to happen, and a lot of things we're going to have to work out around what kind of work is best suited to which location. What's best to do at home? What's best to do in the office? How do we best take advantage of the time when we're in the office? How best do we use these solutions when we're at home? But one thing's for sure, technology can help us in that journey back to a new way of working, and it can support us in this new normal.